Good morning. Good morning and welcome. It's wonderful to have all of you here for today's Faith Forum. I am Joan Kilian. I'm one of the clergy here at Christ Church, and we welcome all of you, whether you're joining us live, whether you're joining us via live stream, or perhaps watching us at a later time. It's great to be with you. I want to also introduce Leslie Peace. Some of you know her already. Together we are 2/3 of the Outreach and Mission Stool. So I am so grateful to have her with me today as well. But we have two very special guests with us. And I'm going to introduce the man immediately to my left first. Some of you already know him and have known him for a while. This is Jimmie Lee Kirkpatrick. And Jimmie Lee is a native Charlottean. They both are, in fact. And Jimmie grew up in Greertown, and we'll hear a little bit more about his background, but he was a football star, All-American football star, and was on the Myers Park High School football team for the 65-66 year. And we'll hear more about that. Woohoo! Yeah, how many Mustangs do we have here today? Oh, yeah. A fair number. Woohoo! Yay. And some classmates of theirs. Jimmie graduated from Myers Park High School and then attended Purdue University, where he continued to struggle because he was part of the integration process in the Charlotte schools here, and he continued to struggle with racism and white social norms that he encountered in high school during his university time. He also discovered a passion for music. I haven't heard him play yet, but I look forward to that. He performed in a successful band and then also successfully agitated to reform college life for African American students at Purdue. Yay, you. He lost his enthusiasm for football. He played for Purdue, and then after a life-changing injury there, he had to give up the football part of it. And he left college and decided to drop out for a while, moved to San Francisco to learn more about himself. This is the age of finding yourself in the 60s and 70s. And he experienced homelessness as well as communal living and political activism. And then his connections within hippie culture, I love how that's written, led him to Portland and Tillamook, Oregon, where he worked in the logging industry. I've had some left turns in my life, but you've had more than I have, so that's great. You were drafted to go to Vietnam, and you narrowly avoided the draft by getting a deferment for that football injury, so that worked out well. In 1977, you decided to go back to school. You finished your master's degree in education and became a teacher in Portland, and that was your career for a number of decades, I believe. And what did you teach?
Social studies, physical education, health,
cool.
Coached.
Okay, all right. He led him, in 2013, we'll hear more about this, he was called upon by a reporter, an editor actually, from the Charlotte Observer to talk about his career at Myers Park High School and the infamous Shrine Bowl event of that year that we will hear about and actually see a video about in a moment. And that was when he was passed over to play in the Shrine Bowl because of the color of his skin. And we will get to hear more about that. But that was life-changing for him because he began to look into his family origins and find out more about them. Which leads, I forgot to mention, there is now an award, the Jimmie Lee Kirkpatrick Award, presented by Dr. Pepper. It's given annually by the Charlotte Sports Foundation to a senior football player in the CMS school district who displays talent both on the field and a passion for their community. And the award comes with a $10,000 scholarship, trophy, and recognition at Duke's Mayo Bowl. So it's named after the gentleman to my left, and that's amazing. What a life trajectory you've had. Sitting a little bit further to my left is Hugh DeArmond Kirkpatrick, also known as D, and he too is a native Charlottean. He got his BA in Fine Arts from Harvard, and then a master's in education and guidance and counseling. Isn't it interesting the parallels in their lives, that they both had education in there? And then he got a PhD in psychology from Saybrook University in San Francisco, so they both spent time in San Francisco. completed a postdoctoral certification in forensic psychology at California School of Professional Psychology in Berkeley. He is board certified in forensic psychology, and for those of us who don't know exactly what that means, what is forensic psychology, Dee?
Well, when I get asked that question, I'm on the stand, I usually say what it's not, which is I didn't have to deal with dead bodies.
Good.
It was the application of psychology to some kind of special circumstance, either in the perspective of an attorney's case or a court's case. So an individual's mental state at the time of the offense might be a circumstance in which an attorney hires someone like me to help determine that, or a judge might appoint me to help determine a child custody settlement.
That's cool. And that vocation, that career, has influenced deeply your authorship of some books and how you live it. In the last dozen years or so, Dee has become an author. This is a murder mystery based here in North Carolina. I invite you to get a copy of that and read it. Alienation of Affection, and you can understand, it's a psychological thriller, so you can understand how his work came into it. And there is a sequel, Trafficking Death, that comes after it. But also, you've written this book, Marse, which is one of the old terms for master in the master-slave, enslaver and enslaved persons. This is a psychological portrait of the Southern slave master and his legacy of white supremacy. So I highly recommend both of these books from Dee. Some of this came about because in 2014, Dee received a phone call from Jimmie that would change his life, and that was the beginning of this relationship that these two men share. It has led them both on a journey of looking at their families and looking at their past, because they discovered, well, Jimmie discovered it first and let Dee know that your, let me get it right, 3 great-grandfather was owned by your 2nd great-grandfather. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that really was the catalyst for all of what has transpired since then. So I want to show, ask Hunter to show, there's an 8-minute sizzle reel, which is kind of a trailer for a documentary that should be finished by about the end of this year that will be coming out, that is called Mecklenburg County. And so this is your first look at what that documentary will be about. So Hunter, if you can roll that for us.
In 1965, Jimmie Lee Kirkpatrick of Myers Park helped integrate the Shrine Bowl.
Jimmie Lee had the moves, he had the swagger.
He was an instant phenomenon.
That's the next Jim Brown right there.
When he got the ball, the game became electric.
The Observer wrote a story about how Jimmie Lee Kirkpatrick became the first black football star at a predominantly white high school in Charlotte, and a central figure in a 1965 civil rights lawsuit.
We thought we were writing about a football game, and the story turned into something completely different.
It was located in Charlotte, but it's set on an island all by itself. And there was only one way in and only one way out. That was Greertown. I grew up with Jimmie Lee, snotty-nosed and barefooted. We all were country boys. We all played football. We played it in cow pastures. We didn't play in no pretty green grass.
At this time, the schools were segregated. Through my elementary and middle school year, I don't think we ever saw a new textbook. You know, we were kind of used to being overlooked and segregated from the majority of society across the board. Communities were segregated, theaters were segregated, parks were segregated, churches were segregated. You had your place in this society.
As a junior halfback at all-black 2nd Ward High in Charlotte, he gained an average of 15 yards every time he touched the ball. His spectacular season made him the first black player named to the Charlotte Observer's all-county football team, and it left him with a choice: stay at Second Ward for his senior season or move to predominantly white Myers Park High. A Charlotte Observer story carried the headline, "Negro Gritter Kirkpatrick to enroll at Myers Park."
Everybody thought that he was a sellout. You know, some of the football players didn't like it. They say, oh man, he done sold out for a pair of khakis and an alpaca sweater.
When football season started, he was an instant phenomenon.
The majority of the schools that I played were predominantly white, and I had two things going against me. I was black, and I was a star player. So they had double reason to try to stop me.
The Shrine Bowl is something Jimmie looked forward to playing in.
There was no question that he would be chosen.
If you made it to the Shrine Bowl, then you done made a name for yourself.
And so when he wasn't chosen, I was stunned.
You just got a raw deal and that was it. I don't think he had any animosity about it because he knew who he was and he just moved forward from there.
It seemed pretty clear to me that it was a racist decision. It just seemed to me to make sense that Klan were responsible for the bombings of Chambers' office and homes and some other of his colleagues' places.
We got one email that turned out to change everything. It was from a guy named D. Kirkpatrick. D said in his email that he was a classmate of Jimmie Lee's, that they had the same last name, and he hadn't talked to him for almost 50 years. Would you put me in touch with Jimmie Lee?
I called Jimmie up and we ended up talking for about 2 hours.
And as I was looking at his letterhead, he signs his professional name, H.D. Kirkpatrick. I asked him what the H.D. stood for.
I said, Hugh. And there was this noticeable silence. And then he said, I know a lot about your family.
And it was his great, four-time great-great-great-great-grandfather who had owned my ancestors.
I was floored. It turned out to be my great-great-grandfather. The narrative of my family being dairy farmers was true, but it was not the whole truth. My family, there were a lot of people who were pretty racist, told a lot of bad off-color stories as I was growing up, and I put up with that. I didn't like it. It shaped me a great deal. We began to take our story on the road and go to churches and to schools and talk about it as a teaching story and a healing story.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow.
I don't understand how it is that an individual such as my namesake, Hugh Kirkpatrick, could justify to himself that owning another human being was morally acceptable.
This enclosed area is the slave cemetery. This is a typical grave site with a stone. You can see there's one there. When I come here, I want to just embrace the feeling and try to put myself in those times and think of their prayers more than mine. And I know their prayers are not the same as mine, because the prayers were probably about some of the suffering that they had and wanted to be in a better place. And I'm sure they are. That's my prayer. That is my prayer. It's nice to get in a peaceful place. And all folks have always told me that they were there to protect, so I feel very protected here.
When these chains get broken, set my spirit free. Oh, Lord, remember me.
Wow. Let me see. I am so grateful to the vestry of this church who approved about a year ago, I think, that we are co-sponsors of this documentary that is coming out. So yay to Christ Church for being a part of this. Jimmie's wife, Vicki, could not be with us this weekend, but Dee's wife, Katie, is in our audience right now, and it's Katie's cousin, right, who is the producer of this movie, Louise Worley. She's a nationally known and acclaimed film producer, and she is the one who is putting all of this together, and I find that amazing and very striking and powerful. If you're curious, the cemetery where they were towards the end of the video is over at Sardis Presbyterian on Sardis Road, and there is it's across the street from Sardis Presbyterian. There's the Scout Hut over there. To the left of the Scout Hut, as you're looking at it, is the historic white cemetery with the iron fence around it. And to the right of the Scout Hut is the slave cemetery. And that part of that is, it was done by an Eagle Scout project they fenced it in, and there's a stone there that says not only African American, but probably Native American people are buried there. They have done whatever that's called, where you do like an underground surveillance to see where the dirt has been disturbed. So they literally know where the bodies are buried, but they don't know who they are because nobody kept track of it. But there are some headstones there, so you know where they are. But I encourage you to go over there and walk around and just spend some time in that peace and think about our conversation today. So, to put a little context in this, Jimmie, first, talk a little bit about your family's history. You're growing up in Charlotte, where you grew up, where you went to school, all of that.
Okay. Thank you. And again, thank you for having us. It's an honor to be here. Seeing some of my friends, old friends and classmates and teammates. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And again, thank you for inviting us. You know, I've watched this Sizzle a few times, and it takes me a while to get my emotions in line. So I don't know why, but it just affects me that way. Every time, Dee always tell me, "Don't cry, Jimmie." But
I don't blame you.
so I'm trying to hold it together here. But as the film says, I grew up just not too far from here in a little town. It was called Greertown when I was growing up. I was raised by my great-grandparents who were born in 1890. They also raised my father, whose mother, their child, passed away when they were early. So my mother and father started bringing me over, and they said, we might as well keep him here. He's here all the time from the old Brooklyn neighborhood. So I was raised by these old people who would take me to visit some of their older friends. So I was all around all these old folks and hearing all these stories and songs and prayers. And I always had a general interest in my family, but not so much as the history until later on. But grew up, really, Greer's Height was, the church was the center of activities. I grew up with my great-grandfather, who I remember, James McVeigh, started Antioch Baptist Church. It used to be out in the woods, out on Monroe Road there by the storage facility, and eventually moved into Greer's Height. My great-grandmother donated some land there, so where it currently is. But again, it was, at that time, it was disconnected from the city, so I can remember, drawing water from the wells, and my great-grandfather plowed the mules and horses, so it was really the country, and I got reminded that every time I would go into the second world community, how country we were. But that was my upbringing. Went to kindergarten at the church school, Billingsville Elementary School, from first grade on through ninth grade, and just wanted to be a baseball player. Never put on football pads until I got to high school. And someone told me, "You're a pretty good football player too," but that was my upbringing. Learned most things through my family's Christian beliefs and Christian ethics, and that's how I was raised, and I still hopefully try to carry some of those beliefs that I was raised as a young child growing up in Greertown.
Thank you. And to add to that just a bit, at the time that you were going to Second Ward High School in Brooklyn was in the process of being razed, torn down, completely obliterated. And more than 1,000 African-American families were forced out of their homes in that area. So as you were going to high school, homes were disappearing and streets were disappearing.
Yes, and that was the community where all the theaters and the YMCA and, it was the place to go, all the stores and clubs and places and parks. And at that time, a lot of the communities competed against each other. So we had a baseball team in Sandlot, and so we'd play Brooklyn and Cherry and all those communities. So that was really, had obviously a big impact on the city and the people that lived in Brooklyn, which was a very tight community, Brooklyn and First Ward there. And we spent a lot of time in the uptown area. Some of you may know that was the community, First Ward, Second Ward, Third Ward, Fourth Ward. So yeah, that was a hub of the community in uptown Charlotte. Was where you went for most things from the country. You went for shopping and visiting. I had a lot of relatives there as well.
Cool. Thank you. What did you want to be when you grew up? A baseball player?
I wanted to be two things when I grew up. I wanted to be like my Reverend Moore, who was this dynamic minister and who sang great. So I would get together and my friends would pretend to be ministers and preach. And my father was a great baseball player, so I wanted to be a baseball player or a preacher. So I started in that direction, but drifted a little bit toward other sports. But those are my dreams. At that time, there were limited opportunities. So even though you dreamed a lot of, the whole community dreamed of what they wanted to be, some of those opportunities were limited. And fortunately for me, sports continue to be one of those areas that you can meet people and grow and develop your own abilities and confidence, and that's what sports was for me at the time.
Thank you. Just one more question about that time period. In the video, it talks about your teammates accusing you of selling out for a pair of khakis and an alpaca sweater and being a little trendy at Myers Park High School. What did that feel like to kind of receive abuse from both sides?
Well, it was difficult, I must say. I was 16 years old, and I didn't think that this would be that explosive. At the time, many people in both communities were doing the civil rights movement, and many people in both communities wanted, integration of the schools. But then there were other people in my community, that frankly felt that that the white community, the white schools are taking away the top athletes, and it was that, how athletics is here in this area, religion, athletics, they're up there together, So, yeah, you would get, those white kids are not going to block for you. It's going to be tough. You're jeopardizing and risking starting to get looked at for college possibilities, and people thought maybe I, was risking going to college, and so it was difficult, and I didn't know anybody at Myers Park at that time, so I was kind of in the middle. It was kind of a lonely time. My girlfriend was still at Second Ward. Where was I going to go socially? So it was all of those things and how people felt. It's important to a young person. So it was difficult, and certainly when I would come home, it's taken, still in progress, I may add. It's taken all of my life to kind of to reconcile with those kinds of feelings.
Imagine.
And
Awesome, thank you. So Dee, I have a question for you. Can you share with us some of your family's history in this area, and how much did you know prior to your life-changing conversation with Jimmie?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I've had the pleasure of presenting with Jimmie now 40 or 50 times in various venues, and I've seen this preacher come out. That has not stopped for him. He's quite good at it. But, I grew up in a native Charlottean in the Dilworth area. I went to Dilworth Elementary, and by the way, Larry Lewis, who was principal of Myers Park, was principal of Dilworth when I was at Dilworth, so that was an interesting transition. Then I went to Sedgefield, then to Myers Park. The short answer to your second part, no one in our family talked about any relationship to slaveholding, slavery. There was a proud stance for the Confederacy. If I'm honest, I probably would have fought for the Confederacy if I had grown up in the mid-19th century. I don't know if it would have been in support for slavery, but there was a tremendous kind of, well, to make a good example, going through my mother's estate, I found a stack of Confederate bills, money, in her, so she was kind of waiting for things to come back, I think. Lost cause was strong in our family. But it was not something that I had any inkling about, as I said in the documentary, or the Sizzle. We were dairy farmers, and there were lots of dairy farms in our family, and I used to play on some, and I grew up on the milk production part of that dairy industry.
Wow, thank you for that. With your family's perspective on race, how did it feel to have a different perspective? Was it hard for you? Did you feel safe? Was it dangerous?
No, it didn't feel dangerous at all. I just kept my feelings to myself until I got to be a fairly mouthy teenager. But my mother owned a catering service and ran a restaurant. It was called the Kirkwood Room and Kirkwood Catering Service. And she had a staff that was quite a diverse group of people, Hungarian, German, and one of the persons that worked for us was a wonderful black woman named Erlene, and she kind of took me under her wing. And what I learned very early from that experience is watch what people do and not what they say. And what I experienced with Earlene was she was a very loving, compassionate person, and her relationship with me was counter to the racism and the white supremacy that was articulated by other members of my family. My extended family was fairly racist, and so I began to question that reality pretty early.
Knowing what you know now, and you being a bit of a mouthy teenager then, do you think you would have had a chance to question more? Do you think you would have put things in different perspective and challenged what was happening at that time, knowing what you know now?
I don't know. I had a brother who was 9 years older, and he's the one that kind of really guided me a lot. He's the one that convinced me to apply to Harvard. I got into Carolina my senior year in high school and put it on cruise control. I was all set. I was basically didn't do anything second semester. He was very instrumental, and he in fact encouraged me to apply, but also said, you're going to have to write something in your application that gets their attention. And I wrote about this guy. We hadn't talked, we hadn't met in 45 years, but his story, being left off the Shrine team, really affected me, not to mention that, Charlotte experienced a series of bombings. This is our, we're 16 years old, and there are bombs going off in Charlotte. It was like, wow, that's pretty significant. So I wrote about that, and it got me an interview. And so his story, his ancestors, got this white boy a scholarship to Harvard.
Wow. So let's zoom in on 1965 and what happened then. And so as a non-native Charlottean, tell me about the Shrine Bowl. Who was it between every year?
Well, the Shrine Bowl game was certainly significant. I can think the North Carolina, South Carolina Shrine Bowl was the first Shrine Bowl in the country. The best North Carolina versus the best of South Carolina was the game, and at that time it was very important, prestigious game, and the game used to be played at up on 7th Street at the Memorial Stadium, and I lived in Greertown when we used to work and sell and work at the stadium there, and I can remember attempting to sell popcorn and peanut, but actually just sitting there watching the games and just visualizing myself on the field, and so when I had the opportunity to transfer, certainly didn't think about it much. It was just mainly trying to do the best I could, but there was that opportunity there. But I must say, since I have someone that's in the audience and know this story, we had an excellent football team. Had some great players. 2 great athletes made the team. One of my best friends at Myers Park early on is David Stanley, who's in the audience, who, and others we became very good friends, and it taught me a lot about friendship and support, gave me a lot of confidence at Myers Park. And so when I wasn't chosen, I didn't come in with expectations of making the Shrine Bowl. I was just surviving at Myers Park was my immediate goal. And so having a wonderful football season and meeting great friends, I was in some ways reached my own personal goal. So when it happened, two good athletes made it. Didn't, I didn't feel the way perhaps other people felt in terms of, just being angry about it. But certainly it was something that you wanted to do. Our coach had a difficult choice. The people that made it went to Division I schools, All-American athletes. We just had a good team, and so I moved on with it and accepted it, and still do. And as I look back now, probably wouldn't be sitting here had things had been different. So I've grown up a little, matured a little around that issue. But it was challenging time. And again, when it happened, many folks felt different about it. Some and kind of stayed away. Some people were angry that it happened to me and kind of stayed back. And some of my white friends felt uncomfortable, and so it was a kind of a lonely period for me during that time, But I moved on. Like I said, I had some great teachers in my family who taught about overcoming obstacles and how you conduct yourself and about character. And so I tried to rely on those kinds of things to get me through. So it was, I learned a lot of lessons to be learned when those kind of things happen.
So the two young men who were chosen were both white.
Yes.
And even one of the headlines, and they focused on that in the video, talked about your calm demeanor and everything. And what little I know of you, that I've experienced of you, I can feel that peacefulness within you. But I find that remarkable that in that moment you were able to be so accepting and calm of what had happened. But not everybody was. And so a civil rights case was filed, and Julius Chambers, and a local attorney, took on that case with the result that, we'll talk about the result football-wise in a moment, but with the result that both his home and his office, I believe, were bombed, as were several homes of some other civil rights workers in the city. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, nobody was killed in any of those, I don't think, but certainly people...
Not for lack of trying.
Yes, not for lack of trying. Which is just a really sad commentary on that time. Now, Julius Chambers filed to not, I probably have too many negatives here, to not have the Shrine Bowl be played, I think. Is that correct? And the judge said, no, the Shrine Bowl should go on, but the teams must be integrated. So what actually happened in that Shrine Bowl? Did it go on?
Yes, the game was played. And both my teammates did very well in the game, and I didn't attend the game, but the game went on and played, and I think the judge, McMillan, I'm sure all of you know, decided, and I think, and just to paraphrase that, even though the game, I wouldn't make it the following year, if there were any black athletes that qualified, that would. And my arch enemy from West Charlotte, did make it. Titus Ivory did make it, and then another friend lived upstate, made the team the following year. And in fact, I think the Charlotte Observer was Gary Schwab. They were looking for the first black athlete, football player, to make the Shrine Bowl. Unfortunately, both those young men died at a very early age. And someone said, hey, the year before, you might want to look at that. The year before, there may be a story there for you. So that's how he had never heard of my story or our story at Myers Park, and he had been there 25 years. So he looked me up in Portland, Oregon, and I told him I would be happy to share the story as long as it was truthful and I was able to express, my side, my story. So that's kind of how it started.
Love that. And Julius Chambers, the attorney, passed away in 2013, and that's when Gary Schwab began to look more deeply into this, I think. Is that right?
Actually, before that, but he did interview Mr. Chambers prior to his passing.
Oh, good. Okay.
About his involvement. And, it's really interesting because Mr. Chambers gave my mother a call because obviously my family was concerned, and just reassured her that I would not be a part of the lawsuit, but certainly, I was the center of the controversy as it was written, but great man, great attorney, and has did a lot for the city, obviously, with his efforts around civil rights issues and justice, yes.
Cool. So then we fast forward 50 years, and we get to this newspaper article, and we get to you two getting back in contact. So how did that contact get initiated? Who called who?
Well, the sequence was I sent Gary Schwab, the sports editor, an email asking if it'd be appropriate for me to contact Jimmie. I was fascinated by the story, and Gary forwarded my email to Jimmie, and so I came in from lunch. My secretary said, your cousin from Oregon called. And I'm like, what? And she said, I didn't know you had a cousin in Oregon. And I said, well, I do now, I guess. So I called him back, and then we had a 2-hour conversation, and that's when he revealed to me this ancestral linkage, which, as I said in the film, it just floored me, and quite literally changed my life. I do want to say, by the way, the film was initially to be called Mecklenburg County. We've just changed the name.
Oh.
It's going to be called A Binding Truth.
A Binding Truth.
A Binding Truth.
I love that, because of binding you together.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
All right. So in the video, there was a quotation from you, Jimmie, where you said to Dee, put aside your guilt, and I'll put aside my anger, and we have a chance to learn from each other. That is such a powerful thing to have said. How were you able to do that? Where had you already processed some of this information in yourself?
Well, my mother passed in 2001, and when I came back, I just started to think about my family, as we do when we lose loved ones, and started to think about, just my family background and history, and, I still live in the same area my family ancestors were as slaves. So I don't know how it happened, just thought of this name, Kirkpatrick. Looked up some of the churches, looked up the history of Kirkpatrick's, and found Sardis Church, and went over to the church and asked folks. And at the same time, just real quickly, I put a ad into one of the genealogical forums back in the time. Didn't know anything about internet, but anybody know anything about Kirkpatrick's in Sharon Township, get in contact with me. Lost the website for 6 years. Stumbled back on it, and a person from Sharon Presbyterian Church, who was a researcher, had found information that documented my great-great-grandfather, born in 1853, in a church sessions at this church, who his father and mother were, and who they were enslaved to. And that person on the Kirkpatrick side was enslaved to Dee's family. So I went, these Kirkpatrick. So I was calling Kirkpatrick's. Do you know anything about your family's history? Just trying to find these connections. And then this article came out. And so when I went to visit Dee, this was several months after the article came out, and Dee and Katie at their house. And, I didn't know Dee. I didn't know how he would respond to these. This is a very difficult subject and a difficult way of renewing acquaintance. So we were talking, and I realized Dee was so open and curious, and we connected with our history, was similar, our life stories, and so I knew that I wanted to learn, I wanted to move forward, and I felt that Dee did well. And as we had conversations, we'd come to these emotional feelings about our anger and our guilt, and we just kind of felt that if we could get through these obstacles, although that's all a part of it, obviously the anger is a part of the emotion. If we could just get through this, we could really, I think, find a lot about ourselves and about our family. So that was kind of symbolically what it meant. It kind of evolved into how we conduct ourselves as we have dialogue and conversation. We trust each other. We support each other. We're not afraid to say the wrong things in front of each other, and we love each other. And so I think that has been, very important in terms of having this kind of dialogue, and that's kind of how it came about, if I answered your question at all.
You did. You've become brothers of different mothers
Absolutely.
in the process for that.
Very good, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, so with this relationship and over the past 7 years, has your relationship impacted either of your worldviews, your children, how you teach others?
Well, I have 3 wonderful stepdaughters. One of them said to Katie maybe a year or so ago, one of the best things that Dee's ever done for our family is bring Jimmie into it.
Nice.
That's high praise. I thought I'd done a lot of really nice things. I could go with it. As I mentioned earlier, my older brother, Robert, was 9 years older, and he died unexpectedly. And that was, he's a person that was pretty significant in my life. And so as this relationship with Jimmie has evolved, it really, truly has become that Jimmie has become my brother, not just saying that we have developed a very deep relationship. And our families vacation together. We just got back from an annual fishing trip. We go to Ocracoke and fish, and we spend a lot of time together. Our kids get together even when the adults are not with them. So it's been pretty significant. And I consider Jimmie to be a gift to me. And that's, when I think about the hardship of having to dig into a pretty sordid history of my ancestors, my namesake, Hugh Kirkpatrick, owned 30 slaves on the eve of the Civil War, which made him a significant slaveholder in Mecklenburg County, in America, really. And so I think, okay, this is Jimmie's fault, But then when I feel very empowered and curious and inspired, and my creativity gets going, which helped me write a book that I just got published. I am so deeply grateful for the gift that he is and brought to me.
Wow. Wow, that's all I can say. I'm trying to fight tears, so.
I don't know you that well, but don't cry.
I'll try my best to. So with this blessed relationship that you and this bond that you have formed, have you ever tried to dig a little deeper and had your DNA test to see if you were actually related?
Yeah, we put that off for a number of years because we got asked that a lot early on. And we thought, well, that's just going to take away from the point. What if we're not? Does it fall flat? When we thought that the importance was the confirmed ancestral linkage. But then over time, we've done DNA testing, and I think I'm showing pretty close to 100% Scot-Irish, and Jimmie's maxing out around 7% Irish, I think. So that's where we are.
Yes.
But the thing that's been tough about that is I can trace my white ancestors all the way back to Scotland, Castle, murders, all kind of things. And Jimmie is on his difficult journey of finding out where his ancestors actually came from, and that's a harder task for an African American.
It is, absolutely.
So I think this has been such a deep journey for the two of you one-on-one. I mean, not counting your families as well, but what do you see coming out of that for a wider application for our city, for our country? How do we get on that journey as well, or go deeper on that journey if we're already there? What advice do you have for us in our conversations?
Tell it.
You know, I have based so much of my life behaviors around just my own personal experience. So it's I can only answer those kind of questions, you know, kind of from my own personal experience. And I have learned, one, that, you know, I'd had no connection with my ancestors and my family. And it bothered me. And what I've kind of learned in a strange way is that, you know, the talents, the character, you know, of who I am didn't just start with me. And so as I learned more about my family's life and their struggles, you know, I can see myself in those characteristics and those behaviors in that. So for one, you know, certainly, and I encourage people to, you know, certainly learn their family's history. And also, I think it starts with our own individual efforts, how we see each other on individual levels. And I think that is done well for me, you know, because I hear the feedback from people that I was only in school for 1 year at Myers Park, and I have lifelong friends. And so what is that? How can that happen? And so I just want to share this story, and we have found that, you know, it's in some ways it's a healing story. We've had response from people to share their own personal stories, which is very similar, to kind of thank us for having this kind of discussion, having this relationship, because it allows them to look at their family history and open up and share things. And so I think that's why we're doing this. We didn't start out this way, but we realized that it struck a chord with a lot of people. And so for me, I've been active, if you will, in my life. And this is a way at this stage of my life of being active, getting involved, and sharing this story and listening to all perspectives. You know, this is we don't look this as divisive. You know, we want to bring all perspectives in because they're all important. So for me, that's the little plug of advice is it starts with us, starts with our friends, starts with who we associate, how we include, and just, you know, building those kind of trust and relationships with people. I encourage young people to do the same thing, step out and invite a friend. And I know churches are doing this, and other agencies and people are doing this because that's who we are. We're better when we're a whole. And so I know people that want to be included and want to include. So that's how I see, and my advice is again, starts with our own individuals, and hopefully sharing these stories, and we certainly can have the capacity and resources to extend that as well.
If I may tag on that. The thing that's sort of been so strongly felt by me, and I'm not the originator of the concept, but slavery in the United States created a wound for all blacks and all whites. It's a wound that we are just beginning to consider how to heal. And it's essential in my opinion, that we figure out how to do that. And as a white male who benefited greatly from white privilege, I think that I've had to look very deeply at that. And I think America has to look very deeply at the myth that there's a hierarchy of races, and that there's this notion that white supremacy is at the top. That's caused a lot of problems, and it's causing us a lot of problems now. And we've got to come to terms with that, because otherwise I think we're in real trouble. And I'm not going to preach anymore. Thank you.
I want to thank you both so much for your time, not just today, but the time that you have put into building this relationship so that you can share it with so many people. And I am grateful that this documentary is being made and will be out soon. Tell me the name one more. A Binding Truth, A Binding Truth. And think about the tie that binds all of us as Christians, as one race of human beings, that we begin to understand each other more deeply. But thank you so much for all that you have done already.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.